Act 1. The Price of a Name. Look at me, Alcinous. Your people laugh. Their bellies are full of honey and their souls are light as sea foam. They have never seen iron enter flesh during sleep. Do you see a king, a hero? Look closer. The light of your torches trembles against my face. Those aren't wrinkles. They are scars from the breath of a god. The wine in my cup, it is too clean. I taste rust and salt in it. My name is Odysseus, son of Laertes, a curse to some, a legend to others. But for those rotting on the seafloor because of my pride, I am simply a murderer who survived. Listen if you have the stomach for the truth, and not just the songs. Part 1. The Taste of Plunder. Troy was burning. The ash of a great city still settled in our lungs, mingling with the taste of gall and cheap victory. We felt no relief, only a void. We were dogs whose bone had been snatched away, killers whose blades had rusted without fresh blood. 12 ships, 1,000 shadows searching for a place to sink their steel. Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. It slept, relaxed and defenseless. We tore into it at the gray of dawn, while the mist still licked the doorsteps, the stickiness of cold blood on my hands. I watched my men turn into beasts. Doors were ripped from hinges. Men died before they could open their eyes. Women became spoils. We took everything: gold, silver, livestock. I stood in the square and watched my warriors divide the women, watched them smear themselves with the fat of slaughtered sheep. I felt it. The silence beyond the city walls grew too heavy. I ordered them to move, now, to the ships. But my heroes, they laughed in my face, drunk not so much on wine as on impunity. They slaughtered cattle right on the shore, built bonfires, and drank the dark poison of the Cicones. And I made my first, my worst mistake. I allowed it. I wanted to remain one of them. A captain's weakness is a death sentence for his crew. Dawn didn't come with the sun. It came with the thud of 1,000 feet. The earth groaned. The Cicones didn't come for gold. They came for our guts. Chaos. The line shattered faster than we could raise our shields. The surf grew thick, red, and warm with our blood. Men who were roaring with laughter yesterday were now trying to hold their own entrails as they spilled onto the sand. 72 of my brothers. 72 voices that now ring in my head every night. They stayed there, rotting under the sun of Ismarus because their captain wanted to be a friend rather than a tyrant. Part 2. The Sweet Poison. Zeus does not forgive mistakes. He tore the sky above us like a wet rag. For 9 days the sea tried to pound the souls out of us. The ships groaned. We bailed water along with our own hope. On the 10th day, a sudden, ominous silence. The land of the Lotus-Eaters. The air there was like molasses. Heavy, sickly. It smelled of the cloying, sweet breath of a divine corpse. I sent 3 men. I looked for swords. I found flowers. They didn't return. When I went after them, I saw something that terrified me more than Troy. My men sat in the dust alongside local shadows. The Lotus-Eaters weren't monsters. They were empty jars. In their hands, pale lotus petals. My warriors, the same men who had walked through hell, were now chewing this blossom. Gray paste on their teeth. Eyes like glass marbles with nothing inside. Only the void. No longing, no pain, no memory. They forgot Ithaca, forgot the names of their wives, forgot the faces of their fathers. 10 years of slaughter, every scar, every loss, all dissolved in honeyed spit in a single hour. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to sit in that sweet rot and watch eternity pass. I felt disgust, a cold, oily disgust for their hollow eyes. I beat them. I dragged them by their hair over jagged rocks, leaving strips of their skin on the sand. They screamed as if I were leading them to the gallows rather than to life. I bound them under the rowing benches like cattle. The lotus is not food. It is rust that eats the steel of human will. My second failure was that I almost allowed myself to envy them. For a moment, I too wanted to forget the blood of Ismarus, forget the screams of Troy. But I survived, and that is my punishment. We sailed away, and beneath the benches wailed men who no longer knew who they were. I saved their bodies, but their souls remained there forever, in the honeyed mist. Mist licked the hulls of the ships like a dead man's tongue. We found this scrap of land by touch, a ghost island lying across from the country of the Cyclopes, screened from them by a veil of damp gray. It was paradise, but in my world, paradise is only a breather before the butchery. There were no people, only goats, thousands of wild goats with eyes like yellow slits. We slaughtered them for 3 days, blood drained into the sand, mixing with the salt froth of the surf. Fresh meat, clean water, safety. We had everything we needed just to live, just to breathe. But I looked across the strait, to where a column of smoke rose over the shore of the giants. Greasy, black smoke. It smelled of someone else's life, and that smell began to eat my mind. My men warmed themselves by the fires, gorging until they were sick. They were happy in their insignificance. But I felt a dark intoxication with my own greatness. It hissed in my blood, denying me peace. Satiety was not enough. I needed a challenge. I wanted to look a monster in the eye and force him to acknowledge my stature. What irony! A man who seeks validation from a beast becomes part of the beast himself. Part 3. The Vault of Pride. I chose 12. The best, the brave, the doomed. I took a skin of wine from Marin. It was thick as Venus blood and smelled so sharp and sweet that the air around it grew heavy. This wine was my fear wrapped in leather. We crossed the water. The shore of the Cyclopes met us with a silence that made the ears ring. We found it. The cave. It wasn't a home. It was a cathedral of savagery. The stench of sheep urine, the smell of soured milk, and the heavy putrid musk of an unwashed, colossal body. In the corners, massive baskets woven from entire trees, full of cheese, white and cold as the flesh of a drowned man. Pails of whey glinted in the half-light like the eyes of the dead. "Let's take the cheese and go," my men pleaded. I saw their hands trembling. They felt what I refused to admit. We didn't belong here. We were insects in a bird's nest. "Let's take the lambs, Captain, fast, before the master returns." But I stood in the center of that stench as if on a throne. I wanted gifts. I wanted hospitality. I invented rules for a game in a place where the laws of the gods had never been heard. I waited for the master as if he were meant to bow to my name. It wasn't curiosity. It was unquenchable vanity, driving me to seek glory even in a predator's den. I wanted this vault, filled with cheese and dung, to shudder at the sound of my name. I heard the water dripping from the ceiling, each drop like a final heartbeat lost in the cold dark of the cave. And I didn't move. I bought myself a crumb of triumph at the cost of their blood. We stayed. We waited. And the darkness began to breathe down our necks. The earth didn't just shake, it groaned. Then came the sound I hear every night when I close my eyes. The hollow, final thud of the stone slab. 20 teams of horses couldn't have moved that bolt. We became rats in our own trap. The light vanished. What remained was the stench, a thick, cloying smell of unwashed giant sheep piss and old, curdled cheese. He didn't waste words on us, the small things. His hand, an oak root covered in coarse hair, snapped into the dark. A jerk. The screams of my men were cut short by a brief, dry crunch. Do you know what a skull sounds like when it shatters against a rock? Like a ripe watermelon dropped on a pavement. He ate them alive, slowly. I heard him chewing, heard the vertebrae snapping under his teeth. Brains splattered across my face, warm, salty, not mine. The wine of their lives spilled across the cave floor, but no one raised a cup. Polyphemus wiped his mouth with his forearm and washed down the flesh with milk that foamed on his beard like the surf after a storm. I gripped the hilt of my sword. Rage blinded me. Blood hammered in my temples. Kill him! Sink the iron into his liver. I could already see where his life pulsed, but a cold, poisonous intellect held me by the throat. If he dies now, this stone becomes our headstone. We will rot beside him, choking on the stench of his corpse. A night of despair, every moment like a hammer blow. We sat in the corner, pressed into the dung, listening to the giant snore. His sleep was heavy and foul, like our very future. That was my first night in the hell I had built with my own hands. Morning brought no sun, only the sound of the slab sliding and light that struck the eyes like a physical blow. Polyphemus didn't forget breakfast. Two more. Two more of my brothers, whose names I had already begun to strike from my memory, so as not to go mad. He devoured them casually, the way we eat bread, and sealed us in the vault again. My brain turned into white-hot iron. I saw his staff, a massive trunk of olive wood, still green, oozing sticky sap. To him, a toy. To us, the mast of a ship that would never see the sea. "Whittle," I croaked. We sharpened the end, made it as keen as greed. I held it over the fire myself until the wood began to char, turning hard and mean. We hid it in the sheep dung, the only place our hope smelled. Evening, the return. Two more dead. The sixth murder on my account because I was the one who led them here. I stepped into the light of the crimson bonfire with Marin's bowl of wine. "Drink, monster. Taste what we serve men in my homeland." He drank, one bowl, a second, a third. The giant's eyes clouded, his gaze grew heavy and stupid. Marin's wine was too potent for his wild blood. "What is your name, you nothing?" he roared, vomiting chunks of human flesh. "I will give you a gift." "My name is Nobody." He laughed so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. "My gift. I will eat you last, Nobody." He collapsed. The monster's sleep was filthy. He retched wine and human remains, drowning in his own filth. We moved. Four held the stake, and I steered it straight into the center of his single eye. We threw our entire weight into it. Do you hear it? The hiss, like a red-hot horseshoe in cold water. The white of the eye boiled, the eyelid charred. The stench of scorched meat filled the cave. Polyphemus let out a scream that should have split the island in two. He tore out the bloody stake, and thick, dark blood sprayed our faces. The other Cyclopes came running. They stood outside the rock asking who was hurting him. "Nobody," he wailed. "Nobody is killing me by treachery." They left. Of course they left. Language became my weapon. A lie saved our skins. I laughed in my soul, wiping blood from my eyes. I had defeated a monster with my mind. But that was when I made my most terrible mistake. I believed I was cleverer than fate itself. I didn't yet know that every cunning step was only driving me deeper into the maw of the sea god. Dawn was gray, like the ash on our faces. Polyphemus didn't just move the stone. He stood in the doorway, his limbs spread like a spider in the center of a web. His fingers, bloody and tacky, twitched convulsively. He waited. He wanted to feel our flesh under his hands. He wanted to rip the skin off anyone who dared to slip past him. I looked at my men. They weren't warriors. They were livestock, a terrified, trembling flock waiting for the knife. So I made them livestock literally. We lashed the rams in threes with sturdy osiers stolen from the giant. Under the middle ram, we slung a man. Do you know what it's like? Dangling beneath a beast, fingers clutching filthy, matted wool that smells of grease, urine, and dung? Every muscle burns, your joints twist, and the ram's heart beats against your chest, a rhythmic, indifferent animal heart. I chose the leader, the largest. His fleece was thick as storm clouds. I gripped it with a death grip. The flock moved. Every strike of a hoof against the rocky floor echoed in my teeth. Polyphemus felt the backs. He looked for nobody on the top, but we were underneath, in the very stench of his wealth. He stopped my ram, the last one. My heart stopped. His giant palm, hot and heavy, landed on the wool directly above my face. I could see his charred socket, still oozing ichor. I could feel his breath. It smelled of my friends. "My dear ram," he whispered, and in that voice for the first time I heard not rage, but pain, the loneliness of a monster. "Why are you last today? You used to run ahead of them all. Do you grieve for your master's eye, put out by that worthless nobody? If only you could speak, you would tell me where he hides." His finger slid through the wool, nearly brushing my shoulder. One word, one breath, and he would have crushed my head like a ripe olive. But he let the beast go. We broke free. We ran for the sea, feet bloodied, dragging the sheep with us. My men on the ships wept when they saw us. They wanted to scream with joy, but I clamped their mouths shut. We loaded the spoils as silent as shadows. Every stroke of an oar against the water sounded to me like a clap of thunder. We survived. We escaped death, but we did not escape my pride. We were far out, at a safe distance where the shore was just a dark sliver. And then something in me snapped. It wasn't bravery. It was a disease. It wasn't enough for me just to survive. It wasn't enough to escape. My eye, which I had so carefully hidden under the belly of a ram, demanded glory. I wanted that monster to know who had broken him. I wanted the world to know I was not nobody. "Hey, Cyclops," I screamed across the water. My voice was ragged, soaked in salt and poisonous defiance. "See? He wasn't so weak, the man whose friends you devoured in your hole. The immortals have exacted your debt for your lawlessness." Polyphemus roared. It wasn't the sound of a man. It was the groan of the earth itself. He ripped off the peak of a mountain. The crag flew over us, blotting out the sun, and crashed right before the ship's bow. A wave rose higher than the mast, black and cold. It hurled us back toward the very shore we had just fled. "Odysseus, stop!" my men begged. They grabbed my arms, their eyes filled with pure animal terror. "Why provoke him? He'll drown us all. Be silent." But I was drunk. Greatness had blinded me worse than the olive stake had blinded the Cyclops. I broke free. I wanted triumph. I wanted my name to enter history, even if that history was written in our blood. "Cyclops," I screamed again once we had pulled further away. "If anyone asks who put out your eye, tell them the truth. It was Odysseus, son of Laertes, lord of Ithaca." That was it. A death warrant signed by my own voice. Polyphemus raised his hands to the black sky. He didn't scream anymore. He prayed. "Poseidon, my father, blue-haired lord of the seas, if I am your son, hear me. Do not let Odysseus return home. And if he is destined to see his native rocks again, let him arrive late, through years of agony, on a stranger's ship, having lost every one of his men. Let him find nothing but trouble waiting at home. The sky shuddered. I felt the wind change. It grew heavy, salty, and hostile. Poseidon had heard. Act 2. The Sweet Mold. Look at me, Alcinous. You want to know what happened after I cursed myself under the Cyclops' eye? Then listen. Part 1. The Copper Prison of Aeolus. We drifted through the fog, and every splash of an oar felt like a groan. Polyphemus' voice echoing in my ears, and then the island of Aeolia rose before us, a floating mountain torn from the seabed and girdled by a wall of bronze. It blinded us, mirroring our shredded sails and our filthy, bearded faces. Aeolus, son of Hippotas. He lived amidst meat, a perpetual feast with his wife and his 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters, whom he had bedded to one another so that blood and wealth would never leave his walls. For a whole month, 30 endless days, I was his entertainment. I sold my scars for a sip of clean water. I told him of Troy. I watched Ilium burn again, watched the blood run through the gutters, remembered how we slaughtered children in the womb. I tore at my memories so Aeolus could wipe his greasy fingers on his robes and whisper, "More, wily Odysseus, more." I was a storyteller in a golden cage, and my men, they rotted on the decks waiting for my word. My hubris grew with the place. I believed I had outwitted the god of the winds himself. When it was time to sail, Aeolus gave a gift. He brought out a 9-year-old bull, slaughtered it, and took the hide. From this skin he sewed a bag, heavy, slick with fresh fat. Silver wire bit into the leather. Not a single breath could slip out. Inside were they, all the wild winds of the world. Every storm, every gale, every scream of the drowned was corked inside that bull's belly. Only the gentle zephyr remained free to nudge us toward the shores of Ithaca. And here is my arrogance, my secret curse. I didn't say a word to the crew. Why? Was I afraid of their greed? Or did I just want to be the only one holding the elements by the throat? I wanted to be a god over my own fleet. For 9 days I never let go of the tiller. My fingers went numb, becoming one with the wet wood. Salt burned my eyes, and my eyelids became heavier than lead. I saw Ithaca. I saw the fires on the cliffs. I could smell home, the scent of peat, pines, and Penelope. We were so close I could see the faces of the people on the shore. And I broke. I slept. Sleep is a small death. And in that death, my friends saw their chance. "What's in the bag?" they whispered, looking at my motionless body. "Gold? Silver? While we die, he stuffs a bag with spoils." Their filthy nails clawed at the silver wire. One yank. Then came the moment that changed everything. The released winds howled in their newfound freedom. The sea merged with the sky in a bloody dance. We were caught like dry leaves and hurled back into the open, salt maw of the ocean. Ithaca vanished. All that remained was the taste of bile on my tongue. When I came to and saw the copper walls of Aeolia again, I wanted to throw myself into the water. I wanted the sea beasts to eat my shame. But I lived. I went back to Aeolus. I crawled on my knees across his marble, begging for mercy. He didn't even stand. His eyes turned to stone. "Get off my island," he thundered. "Worst of the living, you are cursed by the gods. I will not help a man the heavens hate." We pulled away from the copper walls in total silence. No wind, only the sound of our own oars biting into the stagnant water, and the whispers of my men who now looked at my back with a hatred sharper than any sword. My silence had ruined us all, and that was only the beginning. Part 2. Telepylus, the harbor of blood. 6 days we bit into the dead, motionless water with our oars. For 6 days, Poseidon mocked us with a perfect calm. The sea became lead. The sun sucked the life out of us, leaving nothing but salt on our skin and a hollow in our chests. Each stroke of the oar was torture, every splash a reminder that the gods no longer wished to see our sails full. We were the rowers of our own coffin. On the 7th day, when exhaustion made the world double, we saw Telepylus, the high city of the Laestrygonians, a harbor squeezed between 2 cliffs that converged over the water like teeth. Inside, absolute, dead silence. Not a wave, not a breath of zephyr. 11 of my captains, their souls scorched by the sun and their will broken by the endless rowing, led their ships inside. They saw safety. They saw smooth water where ships could be moored side by side, like sheep in a cozy fold. I stayed outside. Why? Was it the wisdom of a king? No. It was a fear I had learned to mask as caution. I lashed my black ship to a jagged rock at the very edge of the cape, far from that deceptive stillness. I left myself a way out, one single way. I sent 3. 3 men whose names are now seared into the walls of my memory. 2 warriors and a herald. I gave the order: find the living and learn if this island smells of bread or blood. I climbed the highest rock myself. I watched my messengers, those 2 warriors and the herald, approach the gates. They followed a path deep into the woods, a trail where giants dragged felled pines. Near the spring of Artacia, where ice-cold water burst from beneath the stone, they met her, the daughter of Antiphates. She was massive. She didn't look like a monster, a goddess with eyes that held nothing human. The girl showed them the way to her father's high palace. And they went. My messengers walked, pinning their hopes on the laws of hospitality, on those very fictions we humans use to try and tame the chaos of the world. When they crossed the threshold of the palace, the sun vanished. There, in the gloom, the girl's mother waited. She was as vast as a mountain peak, blotting out the sky. She gave them a single look and called for her husband. Antiphates didn't ask for their names. He didn't listen to tales of Troy or my wanderings. He wasn't a man who needed stories. He needed meat. He grabbed the first of my men instantly. His hand closed around the chest, and the king began to devour the warrior alive while he was still twitching. Warm blood splashed the faces of the other 2 as the king swallowed chunks of still quivering flesh. 2 of the 3 bolted through the gates. They didn't run. They flew, chased by a terror that has no name. I saw the giants pouring out after them like moving mountains. That was when I knew hospitality was over. I scrambled down to the ship, tearing my nails on the sharp stones. When I tumbled onto the deck, one of those 2, the herald, was already there. He had swam. He leaped on board the moment I swung my knife over the cable. His face was gray as ash, eyes bulging from their sockets. It wasn't a battle. It was the harvesting of game. Thousands of giants swarmed the cliffs around the bay. They had no shields, no spears. They had rocks. Boulders the size of my ships flew down, eclipsing the sun. The sound. You never forget that sound. The strike of stone against oak hulls sounded like eggshells crushing under a heavy boot. 11 ships shattered into splinters. Men, my brothers in arms with whom I had shared 10 years of hell at Troy, were now floundering in the quiet water of the harbor. It turned red instantly, thick and warm. The Laestrygonians descended to the water. They speared my comrades with massive iron harpoons, like tuna in the killing season. I saw their eyes. Even from that distance, I felt them looking at my ship, sitting there in safety. They reached out their hands, choking on salt blood, while the giants carried them away with wild laughter, still alive, to the city, for the great feast where our bodies were to be the appetizers. I didn't rush to help. I simply hacked through the rope holding us to the rock. "Row," I croaked, not looking toward the harbor. "Row, or we're next." The stench of panic on the deck was stronger than the smell of the sea. My men worked the oars as if death itself were clutching their heels. We escaped. We slipped into the open sea while behind us 11 crews dissolved in the bellies of monsters, 11 ships, hundreds of voices. Now, they are nothing but the silence in the bay of Telepylus. I saved one ship, mine, at the cost of an entire army entrusted to me. Do you still not understand who I am, Alcinous? I am a killer who simply knows when to cut the rope and look the other way while his friends are being speared. Poseidon didn't kill me there. He forced me to live with that sound, the sound of stone crushing the skulls of my men. Part 3. The Sweet Mold of Aeaea. We arrived at Aeaea not as warriors. We crawled there like the mangled stumps of a once great army. The ghost island rose from the morning mist like a bloated corpse. There was no surf. The water licked the shore soundlessly, like the tongue of a beast licking blood from a wound. For 2 days we wallowed in the sand. We didn't cry. We had no tears left after Telepylus. We just lay there, paralyzed by grief, watching the sun slowly burn out our retinas. Poseidon didn't kill us. No. He left us to rot alive under an indifferent sky, the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting wood, and despair. That was what we breathed. On the 3rd day, hunger became stronger than mourning. I took a spear and went deep into the island. There, in the thickets, I met him, a massive stag with golden antlers that shimmered like the crown of a neglected god. I killed him not out of a hunter's zest, but out of a fury at the life that kept pulsing in the beast. I carried him on my shoulders back to the ship, a heavy, hot carcass. His blood ran down my back, soaking through my tunic, sticking to my skin. I tasted it on my lips. It wasn't salty. It was sweet. It smelled of flowers and decay at the same time. It was the first taste of Aeaea, the taste of spoiled immortality. We gorged on that meat, gasping, mixing it with sand and our own bile, and then I knew we couldn't stay here. I divided us. Again. I shook the bronze helmet, and the lot fell to Eurylochus. 22 men, those who had survived the hail of Laestrygonian stones, now trembled at the rustle of a leaf. They went into the woods toward a house of dressed stone, from which rose a blue, intoxicating smoke. I watched their backs. I knew I wasn't sending them on a scout, but to another slaughter. But I didn't care. Pride no longer burned me. It had simply scorched a void inside. At the house they met them. Lions, wolves, mountain predators with heavy paws. But they didn't pounce. They approached whining, wagging their tails, nuzzling against the knees of my warriors. Their pupils. They were human pupils in the yellow eyes of beasts. There was no fury, only pleading, only the despair of those who want to speak, but have only a tongue fit for raw meat. My men didn't understand. They stroked their manes, never feeling the human soul shivering beneath the fur. And then came the singing. Circe. Her voice seeped through the stones, through the earth, through the very pores of our skin. It was a song about peace, about how Troy could be forgotten, that one could forget the taste of salt, the screams of the dying, and the faces of abandoned wives. She promised what we craved most, to stop being ourselves. She opened the door, fair-haired, with eyes the color of a pre-storm sky. She invited them to the table. They all went in, blinded by her beauty, like moths flying into a campfire. Only Eurylochus, whose fear had become sharper than his reason, stayed in the shadow of the oaks. She gave them a mixture, cheese, honey, barley, and Pramnian wine. But there was more than joy in the cups. There was a potion that ate away at the memory of home, like acid. They drank greedily, swallowing the sweet poison. And then, the strike of the wand. It wasn't instant for them. It was an eternity of pain. I know because I saw the horror in their eyes later. The warriors' bodies began to arch at unnatural angles, the dry crack of human joints turning inside out. Bones snapped, fused again, changing shape. Skin stretched to the breaking point, sprouting stiff, black bristles. The fingers that held shields under the walls of Ilium, that rode through Poseidon's storms, now fused into cloven hooves. Faces blurred, lengthening into hideous wet snouts. A man's cry became a beast's squeal. In 1 minute, heroes became livestock. But Circe is not just a witch. She is the daughter of the sun, and her cruelty has a divine scale. She left them their human minds. She drove them into the sty like useless junk. They grunted in the mud. They beat their heads against the walls. They tried to scream their names. But only a hoarse oinking came from their mouths. They remembered everything. Remembered Ithaca. Remembered every one of their mistakes. And that was their true hell. Eyes, large, wet human eyes in pigheads. It is a scream without a voice. It is despair locked in the flesh of a beast. She threw them acorns and beech nuts, and they ate. Weeping, choking on their own wretchedness, they ate the food of swine because their will had been dissolved in the Pramnian wine. Eurylochus returned alone. He didn't run. He crawled. He was shaking so hard his teeth rattled against the rim of his bronze helmet. He couldn't string a word together, only wheezing. Forget them. They aren't human anymore. There are only pigs there, Odysseus, only pigs with our eyes. He begged me to flee. He asked to raise the sails and abandon the 22 to the witch's whim. But I stood up. I didn't go to save them out of love. There was no room for brotherhood in my heart then. There was only disgust for myself and for this island. I just didn't care where I died. In the slaughterhouse of Telepylus, under the stones of giants, or in a goddess's bed turned into a pigsty. I was ready to become a pig. Maybe then I'd finally stop feeling the weight of my name. I took my sword and went into the woods. I followed the scent of the blue smoke, feeling Poseidon somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, readying a new trap for me. But here, beneath the shadows of these ancient oaks, I met the one who decided my game wasn't over yet. Gods love to play with those who have nothing left to lose. Hermes met me where the oak shadows were deepest. He didn't descend from the sky in a blaze of light. He was just there, a boy with a face that had seen the beginning of the world. There was no mercy in his gaze, only the cold calculation of an old predator used to counting shadows at the gates of Hades. In his hands, he held a plant. "Here is your salvation, Odysseus." His voice was like the rustle of dry leaves. The gods call it moly. He held out a flower to me, a black root, a white petal, smelling of innocence and death at once. A mortal man cannot pull moly from the earth. The root screams so that the mind of whoever hears it drowns forever in madness. But the gods do not care for the earth's cry. I took the flower. I ate it as the messenger of shadows commanded. The taste. My tongue went numb instantly, as if I'd licked a frozen sword blade in a bitter frost. My throat spasmed, and in my veins, instead of blood, flowed the cold, thick poison of the gods. Moly didn't protect me. It simply killed everything human in me so that Circe's magic would find nothing to latch on to. To become invisible to the witch, I had to become part of her nightmare myself. Circe's palace rose before me like a mirage. She was waiting. She was singing, a sweet voice that vibrated in my bones. Circe was beautiful, with a beauty that burns out the eyes, a silver dress and a gaze that reflected a sun that gives no heat. "Drink, traveler." She held out a golden cup. The wine in it was thick, the color of dark pomegranate. I drank, looking her straight in the eyes. I felt the Pramnian wine mix with the moly in my stomach. Circe smiled. It was the smile of a woman seeing yet another pig. She raised her long wand and touched my shoulder. "Now, go to the sty," she whispered. "Lie down with your friends. Grunt, Odysseus." But I didn't fall on all fours. I didn't make the sound of an animal. Instead, I drew my sword. Steel flashed in the palace gloom like a bolt of Zeus. With one lunge, I pinned the goddess to the floor and pressed the blade to her white, pulsing throat. The steel bit into her skin, and I saw a drop of divine ichor, golden and cold. A goddess on her knees is a sight that makes one sick. In that moment, all the majesty of the immortals vanishes. All that remains is a terrified woman begging for her life. She swore, the great oath of the gods. Only after she swore to do me no more harm did I allow her to touch me. She led my companions out of the sty. I saw the process, and it was worse than the transformation itself. She smeared them with another ointment, and I saw them shed their bristles. Saw their bodies straighten, their hooves split back into human fingers. They wept. They fell to their knees, kissing my filthy hands, washing them with tears of gratitude. They had become younger, taller, more handsome than they had ever been. But it was an illusion. I looked into their eyes. There, in the depths of their pupils, the smell of the sty had settled forever. They were no longer the warriors who stormed Troy. They were a harvest Circe had allowed me to take. She hadn't just returned their bodies, she'd given them a new form of slavery. They had become grateful dogs looking into their master's mouth. We stayed on Aeaea for a whole year, a year of sweet rot. You ask why I didn't leave immediately? Because this island is a soft trap. Circe gave us everything: wine that never ended, meat that smelled of the forest, and flesh that promised oblivion. Every night I spent in her bed. Her skin smelled of herbs, and her embrace was tighter than any chains. I was her lover, and my men were her pets. We didn't notice ourselves growing internal bristles. We stopped cleaning our weapons. Our shields grew mold in the corners of her halls. We feasted while our souls slowly dissolved in that golden forgetfulness. We ate, drank, and slept, turning into fat, contented creatures who had forgotten what wind in the sails felt like. For a whole year, I let the goddess suck the memory of Ithaca out of me. Every kiss from Circe was a scar on my will. Only after 12 months, when the last of my warriors, one of those who still had a shred of human self-respect left, came to me and fell to his knees, did I wake up. "Odysseus," he whispered, "remember Ithaca. Remember us. We're forgetting how to hold an oar. We're forgetting our own names." Only then did I feel the disgust. A sticky, cold disgust for the sweet wine, for the soft bed, and for myself. I went to Circe and knelt before her, not as a lover, but as a prisoner begging for release. She didn't try to hold me. She knew. A year on Aeaea is punishment enough. She let us go, but her final gift was the most terrible. "Your path home lies through Hades," she said, and there was no pity in her voice. "You must hear the shade of Tiresias. Only the dead will tell you how your men will die next." We began to pack. The crew was trembling. The thought of the realm of shades had knocked the last of the wine out of them. We ran across the deck like frightened rats, trying to remember how to be sailors. And that was when Aeaea took her final tithe, Elpenor. It was senseless. As senseless as our entire stay on that island. He had been sleeping on the palace roof, heavy with Pramnian wine. When he heard the clamor of our departure, he jumped up, forgetting where he was. He didn't find the ladder. He stepped into the void. A dry snap, like a dead branch breaking in the middle of a winter forest. That was his neck. He fell onto the stones at my feet, and his soul fled his body faster than we could cry out. He didn't die in battle. He didn't die a hero. He died like a drunken fool who forgot about the edge. We didn't even stop to bury him. We had no time for the dead when we ourselves were going to visit them. We left his body lying under the walls like useless junk after a great feast. His soul flew to Hades ahead of us to make room for my new nightmares. A black ewe and a black ram. Circe brought them herself while we, like madmen, ran about the deck. They were blacker than the very abyss we were about to plunge into. Their wool didn't reflect light, it absorbed it. When I touched them, I felt not just animal fat under my fingers, but the chill of a gravestone. "This is your pass, Odysseus," came Circe's voice, though she herself was nowhere to be seen. "Shades do not speak for free. Shades need a warm, salty river of life so their dry, transparent throats can utter a single word of truth. Blood for a word, life for the path." I looked at those animals and saw ourselves. We, too, were a flock being led to slaughter for the sake of knowledge that we perhaps didn't even need. We sailed. Elpenor remained lying on the stones, his eyes staring at a sky he no longer saw, his neck broken like our hope for an easy return. The wind Circe gave us filled the sails, but it wasn't Zephyr. It was a cold, northern breath that smelled of ice and decay. It didn't just push the ship, it drove us away from the world of the living. We sat at the oars, but we did not row. The vessel flew over the water on its own, water that grew darker and darker, turning from blue to coal-black. The sun began to dim. The light lost its strength, becoming gray and sickly. We were going where the sun never rises, to where the Cimmerians live in eternal night, knowing nothing of the warmth of Prometheus' fire. We were going to the edge of the ocean, carrying in the hold 2 living souls meant to be fodder for the dead. Act 3. The Verdict of Ash. Part 1. Black Blood and Ghosts of the Past. We put ashore where the black waters of the ocean lick the rotting sands of Cimmeria. Darkness. A solid, oily darkness you could scrape from the hull with your fingernails. I drew my sword, dug a pit, cubit by cubit. A square where my last pride was meant to drown. I poured libations into it, honey, milk, sweet wine, pure water. I sprinkled it all with white barley. But it wasn't food they wanted. They craved what they had been stripped of. The warm, salty river of life. I brought forward the black beasts Circe had given. One stroke of the blade. A hot, thick stream of black blood struck the trench. And the darkness came alive. They swarmed from the subterranean fissures, brides with torn throats, warriors in rusted, blood-spattered bronze, old men with empty sockets. They raised their cry, a vile, thin piping like thousands of rats clawing against iron. My stomach turned with loathing. The hand gripping the sword grew slick with cold sweat. Fear. A raw animal terror choked my throat, yet I stood between them and the blood, naked bronze against the locusts of death. First to break through to the pit was Elpenor, our freshly dead. His neck was still crooked, and his breath reeked of the same unwatered wine that killed him on Circe's roof. He didn't drink the blood. Grief gave him the strength to rasp out of turn. "Do not leave me, Odysseus. Do not abandon my bones to the dogs on this cursed island. Burn my armor. Plant my ore upon the mound." I swore it, my first debt in this realm of ash. I had left his body to rot under the walls because I was in a hurry, my cursed haste, my eternal price for the right to survive. Then she approached, Anticlea, my mother. Her eyes looked at me from beneath the mist, empty, blue, filmed over by death. And I lunged at her with my storm-dark bronze. I held my own mother at striking distance, like a stray dog. Because the blood did not belong to her, the blood belonged to the prophet. Is there a sin left that I haven't committed for my own salvation, Alcinous? Tiresias emerged from the depths, clutching a golden scepter, useless iron that in this place cannot buy even a gasp of air. He fell to the trench like a beast to a puddle. Glutted on strength, the prophet raised his head, and I saw his sockets, empty, clouded with a whitish film from which my own sheep's blood ran instead of tears. It matted his gray beard, bubbling and gurgling in his dry throat. He thrust out his sticky fingers, found my face, and smeared the warm filth across my cheeks, spitting my own pride back into my eyes. You blinded Polyphemus, son of the Earthshaker. It wasn't enough to save your skin. Your cursed tongue demanded glory. You shouted your name to the Cyclops so the whole world would know your triumph. Now Poseidon drinks your tears, and you wash yourself in blood. Tiresias warned me against the island of Thrinacia, the cattle of Helios, holy flesh that no knife must touch. If your men kill even one beast, you lose everything. The ship will burn, your men will die in agony, and you will return on foreign planks, alone, broken, and at home rats will be devouring your substance. And finally he spat out my inevitable end, an oar on my shoulder and a long road to where savages know nothing of the sea, eat no food seasoned with salt, and have never seen crimson-cheeked ships. They will mistake my oar for a winnowing fan, there, in the dry earth where not even the scent of the surf remains. I must plant that wood and pray to Poseidon for mercy. Only then will death come for me, slow, tedious from the sea, in the twilight of my years, when old age has drained my strength, if that can even be called living. Part 2. The Poison of Doubt and the Eternal Millstones. I sheathed my sword, allowed my mother to press her lips to the black broth. She opened her eyes and knew me. Her words cut deeper than Trojan arrows. She died of longing for me, for my clever mind, which couldn't save his own mother. She told me of home, my father Laertes sleeping in the ashes by the hearth, dressed in rags, Telemachus fighting off the wolves, Penelope drowning in tears every single day. I lunged toward her, wanted to hold her, to grasp this beloved mist. 3 times my arms closed upon my own chest. Nothing. Emptiness. Only a cold draught. The law of Persephone is ruthless. Fire destroys flesh and bone, leaving only this ghostly mire drifting in the dark. Then the women approached. An endless, pale procession of queens, whose names once made cities tremble, now reduced to the stench of dried blood. They jostled at the trench, shoving one another aside with bruised, blue elbows. I saw Jocasta, her neck still elongated and blackened by the noose, a rasp escaping her lips about the son who became her husband. Beside her, Euryphile bared her teeth, clutching with phantom fingers the necklace for which she sold her husband's life. They drank the black broth and howled their miseries right into my face. Watching this procession of the betrayed and the betrayers, I felt my certainty crack like a dry pine trunk. If the greatest queens end up here like mad bitches, why do I trust the woman I left on Ithaca? What stops Penelope from being next in this line? Agamemnon. Once we crawled before him in the dust under Troy. Now he crawled to my trench, dragging behind him a train of his guards' shadows, likewise hacked to pieces, blue with trailing entrails. He gorged on the sheep's blood, and when he raised his head, a roar broke from his mouth along with black foam, like a beast led to slaughter. It wasn't Trojan iron that killed him. He was butchered by his own wife, Clytemnestra, alongside her lover, Aegisthus. They waited for him to wash away the road grime, drink his wine, and let his guard down. They slaughtered him right at the banquet table, amid the scraps of fatty meat, overturned amphorae and golden cups. He choked in a pool of his own blood mixed with spilled wine, and she didn't even bend down to close his eyes. She left him staring blankly at the ceiling of the palace where he was born. "Never trust a woman, Odysseus." He spat this warm, borrowed sheep's blood at my feet, his phantom fingers clawing for my knees. "Not even the one who swears fidelity at the altar. Land on your Ithaca like a thief, under cover of night, without banners, without shouting. Trust is a noose you tighten around your own neck while you sleep." He crawled back into the gloom, and the poison had already taken root in my mind. If even the great son of Atreus ended up like a pig in a trough, who guarantees that my Penelope isn't already sharpening a bronze knife for me? Then Achilles appeared, our radiant god of war, whose name alone made rivers turn back at Troy. Behind his shoulders, like two submissive hounds, walked Patroclus and Antilochus. Once the fairest men of the Achaean camp, now they were reduced to two pale blurs with blackened lips, who even in the realm of ash dutifully stared into their leader's mouth, doomed to remain forever his shadow and retinue. Out of habit, I tried to weave grand words for Achilles, saying we honored him like an immortal in life, and now he, the great son of Peleus, rules over these countless dead. But he cut me off with a rasp that smelled of a damp cellar and old grass, while black slime still oozed from his pierced heel. "Do not try to comfort me regarding death, clever Odysseus," he hissed. "Better to be the lowest serf on earth, breaking my back for a penniless, landless peasant for a crust of moldy bread, than to lord it over this rotted assembly of the dead who possess not even a name." Achilles wouldn't listen to my excuses. His empty sockets demanded news of his son, Neoptolemus, and I dumped the whole truth out before him, without embellishment or pity. I told him his boy became the first among killers at Troy, that he ruthlessly gutted enemies and slaughtered gray-haired King Priam with his own hands at the holy altar. I mentioned how we burned foreign cradles, and how his son watched it with the cold detachment of a man doing his job. I called him the true heir to Pelean fury. I thought this filth would make him flinch. But the great spirit who had just been cursing hell and weeping for earthly life suddenly drew himself up. His colossal shadow took proud, sweeping strides away across the asphodel meadow, and behind him, keeping strict distance, moved the two other shadows, Patroclus and Antilochus. Achilles walked away, consoled by the fact that his blood had not turned to water, that his name still makes the living shudder with horror. Shadows have no need for repentance. Where there is no future, greatness is measured only by the amount of ash left behind. Only Ajax, son of Telamon, would not approach the pit. He stood apart in deep resentment. His glare burned the bronze on my chest, the judgment for the armor of Achilles. My cursed tongue won that dispute, and because of it, Ajax threw himself upon his sword. I called out to him, begged him to tame his anger, to forget the old feud. He spoke not a single word, turned and vanished into the dark. His silence was heavier than any curse. Part 3. The Abyss and the Living Depths. I stepped deeper, down where the darkness grows heavy as lead, and time stops altogether. There, upon a ghostly throne, sat Minos. His golden scepter gleamed dimly as he handed down his absurd judgments upon those already stripped of everything. What is the sense in judging ash? Past him rushed the giant Orion, once a great hunter, now a fool, chasing across the asphodel field, the ghosts of the very beasts he had slaughtered in life. Emptiness, hunting emptiness. I wanted to laugh at this grotesque futility, but the laugh caught in my throat when I saw Tityos. The son of Gaia lay stretched across 9 acres of scorched earth. He couldn't even flinch while 2 vultures plunged their beaks deep beneath his ribs, tearing out chunks of his liver. The flesh grew back with a crunch beneath the eternal night of Hades, so these monsters would never be left without fresh, hot food. This hopelessness of the cycle paralyzed me. I stared at his torn belly and understood. The underworld doesn't just punish for sins, it breaks man's very attempt to be anything more than dust beneath the feet of the gods. Nearby, Tantalus endured his torment. He stood up to his chin in a pool, yet an unquenchable thirst racked him. Every time he bent his parched lips toward the water, it vanished with a hiss, exposing the black mud. Ripe pomegranates and figs hung above his head, but the moment he reached out his hand, the wind flung the branches into the clouds. Looking at him, I shuddered, for in his agony I recognized my own fate, my eternal, unreachable Ithaca, which vanishes every time I stretch my hand toward it. And further on, coated in foul sweat and dust, Sisyphus strained. With both hands, he shoved a massive boulder up a sheer precipice. Every muscle tensed to the limit, bones cracking under the weight of the stone, and when the summit was but a step away, an unseen, terrifying force snapped the stone downward, and it went thundering back to the plain. And he began anew, without the right to stop. In that stone I saw my own doom, my endless return home through blood and betrayal, where every triumph of mine turns into a new plunge into the abyss. Finally, the furious likeness of Heracles rose before me. Not the man himself, no. The son of Zeus himself, consumed by the fires of Uta, had long since escaped mortal fate and banquets on Olympus at the right hand of his father. But the gods took only his immortal essence to heaven, fed and indifferent to the earthly past, while everything that made him human, his fury, his bloody atrocities, his memory, and the animal fear of oblivion, they dumped down here at the bottom of the abyss. This phantom cast with a taut bow doesn't even know his higher self is currently among the gods. His eidolon is doomed to stand forever in the posture of a killer amid the shrieking of ghost birds. Even the best of us leave our most terrible, most painful ash here in the realm of death, while the immortals claim only our hollowed-out glory. And then the abyss went mad. Thousands, tens of thousands of shadows of the dead swarmed to the pit with an unbelievable, wild, hungry cry. It was the roar of millions of empty stomachs. A metallic taste of panic filled my mouth. Breathlessness squeezed my chest. A raw, icy horror pierced me. What if Persephone has grown tired of my warm spirit? What if she is already sending the head of the hideous monster, the Gorgon Medusa, against me from the depths of Hades? One glance, and my ship, my men, and I myself will become stones upon this shore of the dead. I ran. Kings do not run like that. That is how rats run from a burning trap. I fell onto the deck, scraping my nails to the bone. "To the oars!" I screamed, and nothing of a ruler remained in my voice, only the gasp of a hunted beast. "Tear the water! Row if you want to see tomorrow's dawn!" We leapt onto the benches, grabbed the wood, tore the water until our blisters bled. The swift current of the ocean river caught our vessel and swept it out of the mist, back into the open, salty sea. I escaped Alcinous again. But look at my hands, they are not trembling, no. They are simply cold, like that rotting sand of Cimmeria. Why are you silent, Lord of the Phaeacians? You wanted to hear the story of my glory, wanted to entertain your guests with an epic song. Now you know its real price. Do you think the worst is behind me? That after the gates of Hades, a mortal has nothing left to fear? I thought so too, King. But I was wrong. Even the underworld monsters are incapable of the refined cruelty that the living depths of the sea had prepared for me. Pour me more wine, Alcinous. Sit closer and listen further. If, of course, you are ready for what happened next. Act 4. The Captain of the Dead. Part 1. The Ashes of Elpenor and the Witch's Fate. The current of the ocean spat our ship back out into the open sea. The sun rose over the horizon again, but its light no longer warmed my skin. After Hades, everything looked faded and gray. We returned to the palace of Circe. The witch's island met us with its old stench. Elpenor was rotting on the rocks. Our fresh corpse, whose broken neck and pointless death I had just witnessed in the realm of shades. There, amidst the ashes, I had given him an oath, and here, among the living, I had to pay my first debt. We dragged his cold, stiff body onto the cape, built a bonfire. Fat hissed and popped in the fire. The stench of burning hair filled our lungs with the heavy reek of death. We heaped a high mound and thrust his oar into it, the very wood he held in his hands before falling drunk from the roof. Why does a dead man need an oar on a cliff? An attempt to clutch at the former world, the first price for the right to return. Circe learned of our return. She came to the pier accompanied by maids carrying fresh meat, bread, and sparkling wine. But after the black broth I had fed to the dead, all this food tasted like dry straw. Twice mortal, the goddess hissed, a mix of wonder and quiet contempt gleaming in her eyes as she looked at our hollow faces. She laughed at us. Ordinary men die but once, yet we voluntarily went down into Hades, only to die again now. All day my men feasted, stuffing their bellies, and when night fell upon the island, Circe drew me aside. She made me recount, in every raw detail, every word the blind Tiresias had spat into my face. When I finished, her face went pale. She understood that the noose of fate had already tightened around my throat. Laying her slender fingers on my shoulder, she revealed the deadly traps ahead. She gave clear instructions on how to avoid them, but my boundless pride turned those warnings into weapons against my own men. First you will come to the Sirens. Her voice cut the night silence like Trojan bronze. They are no gentle nymphs, they are monsters, enchanting every traveler with their song. They sit on a blooming meadow, but that meadow is white with human bones, still reeking of rotting flesh. Whoever hears them will never return home. No wife will meet him at the threshold, no children will hold him, for the Sirens bewitch the mind, leaving the body to wither among the corpses. She ordered me to plug my companion's ears with soft beeswax. "If you yourself wish to listen," the witch whispered, "have your men bind you to the mast with heavy ropes. If you beg to be let loose, tie it tighter until the joints crack." Then her words drew two paths, each more terrible than the last. The first, the wandering rocks, the planctae. Chaos rules there so completely that not even a dove can fly through without losing its wings, and no ship has ever passed unscathed, save for the legendary Argo, guided by Hera herself. The second path lay through a narrow strait between two cliffs. The first cliff thrust its sharp peak straight into the sky, forever choked in a black cloud. In its midst, in a dark cave, lives Scylla, a 12-legged, six-headed monstrosity. 3 rows of sharp teeth bristle from her yelping maws. She barks like a young pup, but she snatches 6 warriors from every ship at a time, 1 for each starving throat. The second cliff is lower, crowned by a sprawling fig tree. Beneath it lives Charybdis, who 3 times a day swallows the sea and 3 times spews it back like a boiling cauldron. If a ship finds itself there during the swallowing, not even Poseidon himself can save it. Keep closer to the cliff of Scylla, Circe advised, and there was no pity in her eyes. Better to lose 6 men than the whole ship. My warrior's mind revolted. I asked if I could fight Scylla, defend my crew with my storming bronze. The goddess flared in anger. Relentless fool, are you still thinking of military exploits and battles? She is immortal. There is no defense against her. The only way out is to run. Finally, she repeated the terrible warning of Tiresias, the island of Thrinacia, the sacred herds of Helios, the sun god, 7 herds of cows and 7 flocks of sheep who are never born and never die. If your men touch them with a blade, the ship and the entire crew will perish in fire, and you will return to Ithaca, a ragged beggar. I listened to her, but the poison of doubt that Agamemnon had poured into me back at the bloody trench was already festering in my heart. Whom to trust? A witch? The gods? I decided that my cunning mind could outsmart even prophecies. Part 2. The Sirens, Honeyed Death. In the morning, we weighed anchor. Circe sent us a favoring wind that beat merrily into the sails. I gathered the crew on deck. I looked into their exhausted faces and lied to them again. I told them only a part of Circe's words about the Sirens. I kept silent about the 6 maws of Scylla. I feared that panic would paralyze them, that they would drop their oars and hide in the hold, leaving us to die. A captain's fear is a death sentence for his crew. Suddenly the wind died. The sea became smooth, heavy, and slick. We furled the sails. I took a lump of beeswax, kneaded it with my hot hands, and plugged the ears of every warrior. They became deaf to the world. Me, by my own command, they seized, pressed against the oak mast, and bound with heavy ropes. The ship closed in on the island. And then they sang. That voice, it didn't enter through the ears. It crawled under the skin, tickled the brain, turned the vitals inside out. They sang of Troy, of the great glory of the Achaeans. They promised me all-knowingness. We know everything that the Argives endured by the will of the gods. The promise of glory was so seductive, the song so beautiful, that my heart twisted with a wild desire to stay there on that blooming meadow. I forgot Ithaca, forgot my son. I forgot that this song is bought with death. I twitched my brows frantically, signaled my comrades, demanding they untie me, screaming without a sound, choking on my own spit. But Perimedes and Eurylochus leapt up. Their ears were plugged with wax. They could not hear my madness. They came over and bound me with even tighter ropes that bit into the flesh until it bled. Only when the island of the Sirens vanished from view and the salty surf drowned out the sweet stench of their song did the men pull the wax from their ears and set me free. A first victory? No. A defeat. I realized how cheaply my soul could be bought with a few words about my own greatness. Part 3. Scylla and Charybdis. The price of 6 lives. Soon smoke rose ahead. Massive waves, a terrifying roar of the sea broke out, making the planks vibrate beneath our feet. It was Charybdis. Terrified, the sailors dropped their oars. The ship stalled before the mouth of the abyss. I began to walk among them, cheering them on, reminding them how my mind had already saved them from the Cyclops Polyphemus. I used that same memory of my triumph just to force the men to row. I ordered the helmsman to keep as far as possible from the smoke and the churning waves of Charybdis, hugging the opposite cliff. Of Scylla I remained silent again, but my pride won out over Circe's counsel. Forgetting her strict order not to take up arms, I put on my heavy bronze armor. I dropped my hand to the hilt, drew my heavy bronze sword, and stood at the ship's bow, watching for the monster. I wanted to fight immortal evil. I wanted to prove that Odysseus was stronger than prophecies. What stupidity! The ship entered the narrow strait. On one side, Charybdis swallowed the water with an unbelievable roar. The sea boiled like a cauldron over a raging fire, spraying foam onto the tops of the cliffs. When she dragged the water down, the black bottom was laid bare, right to the black sand. Horror paralyzed the crew. Everyone looked left at Charybdis, expecting death from the abyss. While we stared at the whirlpool, Scylla struck from the right. She extended her long, fleshy necks from the cave and snatched 6 of my strongest, finest warriors right off the deck. I turned at the scream and saw only their arms and legs flying into the air, twitching erratically in the sky. "Odysseus!" they cried. They called my name in their final, desperate agony, clawing at the air as if I were still their almighty king. And I stood there in my useless, shining armor with a naked sword, and could do nothing. This bronze, which had struck terror into mortals at Troy, proved to be nothing but a worthless splinter here, a treacherous glint at the monster's feast. My muscles turned to stone, my weapon hand grew heavy. All my military experience, all my vaunted tactics rotted away in a single second before the raw primal force of chaos. I squeezed the hilt until my knuckles turned white, but the enemy was high above my blade, unreachable for human fury. Scylla dragged them up to her cave, and there, at the foot of the black cliff, she devoured them. I saw her long necks swallowing the living, twitching human flesh. My men thrashed in convulsions, screaming from the depths of her throats, their bones cracking under those 3-rowed teeth. Hot drops of their blood and shreds of torn clothes rained down onto the deck, washing away my pride. It was the most horrific sight I had ever witnessed in all my years of wandering. No underworld of Hades could compare to this shame. My fear and my silence cost them their lives. I didn't just fail to save them, I led them to the slaughter, marched them past one horror just to feed them to another. I fled, ordering the survivors to strike the oars harder, leaving the souls of my best warriors to agonize in the throat of the monster, exactly as we had left the slain to rot, unburied beneath the walls of Troy. Having escaped the monsters, we approached the beautiful island of Thrinacia. Even from the sea, a terrible sound pierced my ears, the lowing of cows and the bleating of Helios's sheep. Tiresias's warning flared like fire in my mind. I turned to my men, demanding we sail past. I screamed that the greatest disaster awaited us there. But Eurylochus stepped forward with a sharp objection. His eyes burned with mutiny, and his words cut like Agamemnon's talk of betrayal. "Your men are exhausted, sleepless, their hands worn to bloody blisters, and you forbid us to step on land to cook a hot supper. You force us to sail into the dead of night, when ruinous storms are born." The rest of the crew backed him with a wild uproar. I remembered the prophet's words, "Trust is a noose." They outnumbered me, and my authority snapped like a dry pine. I agreed to the stop, but I bound them all with a terrible oath, to eat exclusively the food Circe had given us, and not to touch a single animal on the island. The next day, notice, the south wind rose. It blew with such force that we could not put out to sea. This storm lasted for an entire month. As long as we had the witch's bread and wine left, the men kept their promise. But when the provisions ran dry, hunger began to claw at their stomachs, eating out their insides. They roamed the island, trying to catch whatever fish or birds they could with curved hooks. But hunger was stronger. One day I went deep into the island to pray to the gods in solitude for salvation. And what did the immortals do? They cast a deep, heavy sleep over me. They clouded my mind as they had done before at Troy, to let fate fulfill itself. And while the knife entered the sacred throats of the cows back on the shore, the gods granted me a sweet, torturous illusion. I dreamed of the smell of blooming almonds on Ithaca, the soft bread on my father's table, and Penelope's cool, soothing hand on my forehead. I saw my home in my dream, alive and untouched, at the exact moment reality around me was turning permanently to ash. The gods lulled me with peace just to make my awakening hellish. While I slept, Eurylochus gathered the men for a brief, ruinous council. "The worst death is death by starvation," he whispered like a serpent. "Let us take the finest of Helios's cows, sacrifice them to the immortal gods, and upon our return to Ithaca, we will build Helios a magnificent temple. And if the god grows angry and sinks our ship, better to die in the sea in an instant than to waste away slowly from hunger on a deserted island." My men quickly drove out the sacred cows grazing nearby, surrounded them, slaughtered the animals, skinned them, burned the thighs for the gods, and spit the rest of the meat. Part 4. The Wrath of the Gods. I woke up and headed for the ship. Even from afar, the wind carried the smell of roasting fat to my nose. The metallic taste of panic, the very same from the trench in Samaria, convulsed my throat. I screamed in horror to the gods, realizing my men were doomed. The nymph Lampetia immediately informed Helios of the crime. The enraged sun god appeared before Zeus, demanding vengeance, threatening to descend into the realm of Hades and shine among the dead, to shine upon that ash I had just seen. Zeus promised to shatter our ship with his lightning bolt out in the open sea the moment we left the shore. For 6 more days, while the southern storm held us trapped, my companions feasted, stuffing their bellies with the cursed meat. The gods sent them terrifying omens that made the stomach run cold. The flayed hides of the animals crawled across the sand, and the meat on the spits, both raw and roasted, groaned with a pitiful lowing, like the voice of living cows in the flames. They gorged on the voices of those they had slaughtered, doomed and blinded by their sin. On the 7th day, the angry notice finally subsided. As soon as the sea calmed, we hurriedly raised sails and put out to sea, fleeing the desecrated island. But when Thrinacia vanished from sight, and nothing but sky and water remained, Zeus unrolled a cloud over us, black as night. The sea beneath us darkened. Suddenly a violent western wind, Zephyr, struck. A terrible squall snapped both forestays holding the mast. The heavy oak beam crashed backward, crushing the helmsman's skull. He flew overboard, and the waves instantly claimed his dead body. In that same heartbeat, Zeus struck the ship with a thunderbolt. The vessel shuddered from the lightning strike, filled with choking sulfur, and every single sailor was thrown into the sea. Like seabirds, they bobbed on the waves around the shattered ship, screaming, clutching at splinters. But the sea swallowed them forever. Not one of my companions survived. Tiresias's prophecy was coming true, word for word. I was left alone. The waves tore the hull planks from the keel. I managed to bind the keel and the mast together with a strap of oxhide, making a crude raft, and sat upon it. And then the south wind rose again. It carried me backward, straight toward the horrific Charybdis. By morning I arrived there. The monster was just beginning to swallow the water. My raft was sucked into the whirlpool, straight into the black rot. But I reacted on instinct. I leaped up and grasped the branches of a tall fig tree growing on the cliff. I hung there like a bat. Beneath me roared the abyss, ready to swallow my flesh. My feet had no foothold, my muscles tore from the strain, and cold sweat poured into my eyes. I waited. For hours. It felt like the torments of Sisyphus I had seen in the underworld, where my boulder was my own body, which I had to hold above death. At noon, when the judge rises from the bench for his midday meal, Charybdis finally spat the logs back out. I released my fingers, plummeted down, and crashed into the water next to the mast and keel. I quickly scrambled onto them and began to paddle wildly with my hands. By the will of Zeus, Scylla did not notice me this time. The gods spared me. The name of Odysseus was to be preserved for greater torments. For 9 days I was tossed by the raging sea, without water, without food. My skin peeled from the salt, my lips cracked to blood. On the 10th night the gods washed my raft onto the shore of the island of Ogygia. There lived Calypso, the nymph with the braided hair, who took me in, gave me warmth, and surrounded me with her stifling love, keeping me captive for 7 years, like a ghost in a cave. With this, I end my long tale. Did you want to hear the story of my glory, Alcinous? Now you know its true price. I am Odysseus, the great hero, the sacker of cities. But my name was bought with bronze, stupidity, lies, and the blood of my men. Tiresias was right. I returned alone, broken, on foreign timbers. Now only Ithaca lies ahead, where rats are already devouring my kingdom.